Yes, I am very much late to this review. I wasn't even going to do a video talking about this movie just because it's been out for so long. That's the nice thing about movies. They're always there, so we can always talk about them. Spiral from the Book of Saw is a horrible title. Seriously, why The Book of Saw? I don't remember there being a single book in any of the 8 movies that came before this. Kind of like they're trying to make it sound a little bit more upper class than it is. The Chronicles of Saw. At least at the end it makes it a little bit more interesting. What the movie actually is the 9th entry in the Saw franchise. A franchise that, let's be honest, hit its peak after the first movie and steadily went downhill from there, as most franchises in the horror genre, or I guess any genre, do. But you know what? This movie was far better than I thought it was going to be. But let's see what it took to get there. The first Saw movie really was well done. At the time, it was an original effort from James Wan, that small name director who went on to create stuff like The Conjuring. And sure, between that first Saw movie and probably the first Hostel movie, they basically birthed the torture porn horror genre. But back then, when it all started, at the time, which I feel like I'm going to say a lot, it was a fresh take and a pleasant surprise. So of course it would end up getting a million sequels. And there are a ton of great scenes in that movie that stuck with me. From Cary Elwes sawing his damn foot off to Jigsaw slamming the door at the end. Game over! It was a fresh take. I even have so-so memories of Saw 2. The one where the characters are all trapped in the house and there's the pit of the syringes that the girl gets tossed into. And the big reveal is that the police officers that we've been following, we thought it was happening on the same timeline and everything in the house actually happened hours, if not days before. So everybody's thrown out of whack. That wasn't bad. But after that, with the rest of the Saw movies, nothing but a blur. Sure, I remember certain traps and scenes, but you couldn't pay me to tell you which movies they were from, not accurately. And that's because it really all just became quite generic. Hey, 8 films will do that. And that is where Spiral comes in. It's not just another Saw movie. It's a Saw movie that stars Chris Rock. That's actually pretty cool. I never would have thought in a million years that an actor like Chris Rock would have attached himself to a franchise like the Saw films and then put forth so much effort to really make it decent. And that's really the hook and the best part of this movie, Chris Rock being in it. Other than that, yeah, it's pretty much the same shtick when it comes to the traps in the story. I guess it does change the formula up a little bit. Instead of random people that have done horrible things and need to be taught a lesson, this time the killer's going after cops. And the killings are pretty much happening in real time. I feel like with the first Saw movie, there wasn't a formula for them to work off of. That's probably why it was such a nice surprise. And by Saw 8, the formula had been perfected so much that everything about the movies just seemed to be a walk in the park for the filmmakers. And now with Spiral, that formula that got a little bit stale is trying to find a new way to present itself. Whether or not you're gonna enjoy it kind of depends on how committed you are to this film series as a whole. It's the same director as Saw 2, 3, and 4, and as much as I enjoyed Spiral, I couldn't help but wonder how much better, or maybe just how different it would have been had it been James Wan that came back to do this semi-reboot. I say semi-reboot because it doesn't ignore the films that came before it, but it sure doesn't tie itself to any of the nonsense that came after John Kramer died. I realize now I haven't really mentioned the plot of this movie, probably because I just assume everybody knows what the plot of a Saw movie is. But that's not fair because I guess this one is a little different. Chris Rock plays Zeke, a homicide detective who is pretty by the book, and his entire career he's been surrounded by dirty cops. And now those cops are dropping like flies, so Zeke has to find out who the killer is before the movie ends. Near the beginning of the movie, Zeke gets paired up with a rookie as Spiral does its best to emulate any 80s or 90s buddy cop drama, which is equal parts entertaining and jarring in a Saw movie. Seriously, from the stereotypical scene of the police chief reaming Zeke out for the way he does business to Zeke screaming, "I don't need a partner," I was just like, we're doing this in a Saw movie. Oh, okay. It shouldn't have worked in a movie like this, but oddly enough, it kind of did. And that is probably because of Chris Rock's performance. I think it's pretty cool that an actor like Chris Rock would do something like this in his career. As tired as the Saw movies got after 8 films, they made it to 8 films because they're popular. So I guess it's not that big of a stretch to assume that an A-lister would tie themselves to the property to try to shake things up. Is Chris Rock an A-lister? I don't know. He's a pretty big name to me. The movie also doesn't waste your time. For most of the runtime, it's got the pace of a rocket rocket ship. Things just happen and happen fast. It wasn't bad, but it was noticeable. I actually wouldn't have minded if it had slowed down just a little bit on occasion to sort of let the audience catch their breath. Maybe some softer editing could have helped to cover up the obviousness of the pace. That being said, you also don't want a movie like this to overstay its welcome. A couple of dings that I will give this movie is that at its core, it's supposed to be a horror movie, and it's really not that scary. Sure, there are a couple jump scare moments, but those don't count. It's still a Saw movie, so horror aside, it really just relies on the sheer amount of gore and the creative traps to shock you. It just would have been nice to have seen a little bit more tension and some actual horror moments. And the big reveal, at least to me, was super obvious. If you pay attention at all when you watch movies like this, then you're going to figure it out too far before the proverbial door slam. Spiral gets a 7 out of 10, and that's because of how entertaining it is to see Chris Rock as the main character in a Saw movie. And of course, it sets itself up for a sequel, so I'm super curious to see if Chris Rock is going to be back for Saw X. So what about you? Have you guys seen Spiral yet? It's been out for a while. If you have, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next one.